Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Bookspin. So it's time for another book tag video. I was recently tagged by Marissa Bailey, so thank you very much for the tag. If you're not familiar with Marissa's channel, I'd highly recommend checking it out. She has a variety of content on different types of books, from classics, graphic novels, and Murakami, and she has some very thoughtful insights in her reviews. She also has a weekly segment called Philosophy Fridays, which is always very interesting to follow, so have a look. Anyway, there are 5 questions in this tag, and it's called the 2 books tag, so let's get to it. The first one is 2 books you recently read. Okay, I'm going to mention this one first, A True Story. I mentioned it in a previous video. This is supposed to be the world's oldest science fiction story. And as it says on the back, this piece of fantastical fiction parodies many works such as Homer's Odyssey and is certainly a contender for the title of earliest science fiction story. Basically what it is, it's an ancient Greek text in which the protagonist goes on this bizarre journey. He travels to the moon, he meets some aliens, and takes part in an interplanetary war. And when I put it like that, it certainly sounds like science fiction, but really it's not. It's more like it reads more like a classical myth or fantasy, if you like. So I think calling it science fiction is a bit of a stretch. It's very fanciful and fantastical for sure, but I wouldn't call it sci-fi. But it's quite an entertaining read nonetheless. The second book for this question is The Children of Men. I read this fairly recently by P.D. James. This is a dystopian apocalyptic thriller in which humankind has become totally infertile and people no longer have the ability to have children. Okay, so it's basically like the apocalypse in slow motion. Just everyone gradually dies out. And it's this was a good read. I enjoyed it. It's exciting and fast-paced, and I'd recommend it. Next question is 2 books that are nostalgic to you. Okay, so the first book I've chosen for this question is Hyperion. I no longer have the original copy that I owned. I gave it away a long time ago, but I definitely plan to reread this book at some point, so I need to get a new copy. But anyway, Hyperion is an epic space opera with a very interesting structure. This follows a group of pilgrims traveling on a journey to visit the Shrike, which is this monstrous godlike creature. And along the way, each traveler tells their story about why they're on this mission in a fashion which is very similar to the Canterbury Tales. And this is one of the first science fiction books I read when I was younger, and it's such a powerful story. It's so well written that I still think about it very often many years later, and it's a book which I definitely need to reread at some point. So yeah, it's nostalgic because for me it brings back memories of what got me into this genre in the first place. And the second book I've chosen for this question is not actually science fiction at all. This is Swann's Way by Marcel Proust. This is the first book in Proust's epic 7-volume novel In Search of Lost Time. And I read this a few years ago. It's basically it's written in a stream of consciousness. It's quite dense, and I could only read it in small chunks at a time. But the prose is very beautifully written, and I think it's fitting to call this nostalgic, not just because it brings back memories for me, but the major theme of the book is memories of the past, and especially involuntary memory. There's this famous scene in this novel where the narrator eats a Madeleine cake at the start or early on in the book, and this brings back a whole host of memories from his childhood, which he then begins to narrate. So this is an absolute classic. It's quite difficult to read, but it's also very beautifully written. So it's a nostalgic book for sure, I think. The next one is 2 books that you read for school that you would like to read again. Well, the one book that comes to my mind is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which I read at school when I was about 13 or 14. I can't remember a lot about it, but I do remember it was very chilling. It's basically a classic sci-fi dystopia in which a futuristic society is controlled through things like genetic engineering and drugs and brainwashing. And I really can't remember a lot of the plot, what happened, or the characters in the story, but I do remember it being a very chilling read and a classic dystopia. And that is definitely in my high up in my reread list. I don't have a copy of it at the minute, but that is definitely something I'm looking for. That's probably the only science fiction novel that I recall ever reading for school. So for the second book, I'm going to choose One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, which is a classic 1960s novel set in a mental hospital. It's a very fascinating story which explores the boundaries between sanity and madness. And you may have seen the film, the 1975 film, I think it was, with Jack Nicholson. That's one of my favorite films of all time. And so that is I wouldn't mind reading that book again at some point. The next question is 2 books that you have wanted to read. Okay, so I picked a couple from my bookshelf because there are a huge number of books that I want to read. But here are a couple. The first one is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. I don't know a huge amount about this book or the details of the plot or the characters. All I know is that it's about a Jesuit priest who responds to a strange radio signal and sets out on a scientific mission to make first contact with an alien race. It's quite a long, chunky read, but I'm really looking forward to this one. The other one which I'm looking forward to is Broken Stars. This is a collection of modern Chinese science fiction in translation, translated by Ken Liu. In fact, if I look up here, where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. This is a follow-up to this book, Invisible Planets, which I read a few years ago and I really enjoyed. There's some great writers in here, like Cixin Liu, Hao Jingfang, and so on. So I haven't got around to reading the follow-up yet, but I'm looking forward to this one. Okay, the last question is 2 hyped books that you will probably read. Okay, again, there are a lot of books I could put in this category. One book that comes to mind is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is a first contact space opera story in which humanity has left the Earth behind and is trying to start a new life for itself on a terraformed planet. I don't know a lot of detail about this book, but I've heard so many good things about it on BookTube, and it's high up on my TBR, and I can't wait to read it. And the second one is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This one is book 1 of the Wayfarer Quartet, and it's a feel-good space adventure story with really interesting characters. That's what I've been told. I'm looking forward to this one. I had a look on Goodreads. It got quite a few mixed reviews. It's quite a divisive book, but most people like it, so I'm looking forward to reading that one. So that's all of the questions. To wrap up, I should tag a couple of booktubers worth following. The first person I'd like to tag is Book Reading Billy, who makes fantasy and science fiction content. I've mentioned his channel before. It's definitely worth checking out. And the second booktuber I'm tagging is Science Fiction Reads, who has a wonderful collection of sci-fi books and always makes very interesting videos. Obviously, it's up to you if you want to follow up on this tag, but I'll put links to both channels below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for further science fiction content to come.